Imagine if the Bible we know concealed crucial details about the creation of the world, the lives of the patriarchs, and even the commandments of the Almighty. The Book of Jubilees, carefully preserved within the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, claims to fill these gaps, unveiling hidden narratives and deepening our understanding of the divine plan. However, there's a catch. This work was excluded from the main body of Christian scripture. Why? We will lift the veil of mystery surrounding the Book of Jubilees, also known as Little Genesis, and explore why its 50 chapters were not included in the accepted Christian Bible. This ancient text offers us missing pieces of the Genesis narrative, revealing a cosmic perspective on how angels, celestial time, and profound commandments were revealed to humanity. But there's more. The book claims that the calendar most of the world follows is flawed, and that time itself was imbued by the Lord with a sacred structure that few adhere to today. So why was this ancient text rejected by the early Christian church? What secrets does it hold that were deemed too controversial for mainstream Christianity? The Book of Jubilees begins by retelling the creation story familiar from the Book of Genesis, but it significantly expands upon the framework established by most Bibles. According to Jubilees, when God created the world, He didn't merely breathe life into it. He established the very structure of time, aligning it with His divine order. This is where the concept of sacred time emerges. Unlike the calendar we are accustomed to, the Book of Jubilees proposes a precise solar calendar governed by celestial angels who oversee the cosmic cycles of creation. It's not merely about counting days, but about living in harmony with God's will. Jubilees asserts that humanity was meant to follow this divine calendar, consisting of 364 days, divided into 4 seasons of 91 days each. This structure ensures the consistent observance of sacred dates, such as the Sabbath and religious festivals. It is a perfect system that has been forgotten by the rest of the world. In the Book of Genesis, the narrative begins with the creation of the earth. But Jubilees offers a grander picture. Even before the world was made, angels were created on the first day of creation. These angels play a crucial role in governing the universe, including the regulation of time and seasons. The Book of Jubilees reveals that these angels were granted special powers by God. Some observed natural phenomena, such as the movement of celestial bodies, while others served as messengers and guardians of divine laws. In the Book of Jubilees, a significant role is assigned to angels as the overseers of celestial bodies. The idea that angels govern the heavens is found in other ancient texts, but the Book of Jubilees particularly emphasizes the role of these angelic beings in maintaining order in the universe. They ensure that the sun, moon, and stars follow their divine trajectories. The book states, "For He commanded the sun to observe its course according to the divisions of the seasons." It is stressed that angels not only observe humanity, but also control the very fabric of time. When humans deviate from divine time, it leads to chaos, and this theme is central to the entire Book of Jubilees. One of the most contentious points in the Book of Jubilees is its insistence that the world should follow a solar calendar, rather than the lunar calendar that was eventually adopted by many ancient cultures, including the Israelites. According to the Book of Jubilees, the solar calendar is the only correct way to measure time, as it perfectly aligns with the divine order. The book explains that the solar year consists of 364 days, divided into 52 full weeks. Each season, be it spring, summer, autumn, or winter, comprises exactly 13 weeks or 91 days. This system ensures that the Sabbath and other holy festivals are always observed on their appointed days each year. Notably, this solar calendar bears a striking resemblance to the Ethiopian calendar, which is still used by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church today. The Ethiopian year consists of 13 months, 12 months of 30 days each, and an additional month called Pagume, comprising 5 or 6 days to compensate for the difference. This raises the question, is the Ethiopian calendar one of the few modern systems that still reflects the sacred time described in the Book of Jubilees? In contrast, the lunar calendar, adopted by many cultures of the ancient world, including the Israelites, is seen as a distortion of the divine order. The lunar calendar is characterized by irregularity, leading to the shifting of months and festivals. The Book of Jubilees warns that such a deviation from the solar calendar brings about spiritual disorder. The book states, "There will be those who will surely observe the moon, but they will corrupt the seasons and make an abominable day a day of testimony." According to the Book of Jubilees, following the lunar calendar is not merely a mistake, but a form of disobedience to God's will. The book asserts that by returning to the solar calendar, humanity can restore its connection to the divine rhythms established at creation. The Book of Jubilees affirms the traditional narrative of the 6 days of creation, as described in Genesis, but elaborates on the significance of the first Sabbath. According to Jubilees, God did not merely rest on the 7th day, but consecrated it as a divine institution, an eternal law given to both humans and angels. The Sabbath is viewed as the foundation of time, a day set apart at the beginning of creation and intended for perpetual observance. The idea of the Sabbath as a universal law is crucial in the Book of Jubilees. It governs not only the weekly cycle, but is also connected to a larger structure of time, including Jubilee periods which comprise 49 years. These cycles are intended to restore the world's harmony with the divine order, providing a time for rest, liberation, and renewal for the earth, people, and even the angelic realm. In the Book of Jubilees, chapter 2, verse 1, it states, "For he sanctified the 7th day and blessed it for all times as a sign of holiness for all his works." The emphasis on the Sabbath as an eternal law shows that the Book of Jubilees does not merely retell the story of Genesis, but also reveals the hidden meaning of the temporal cycles that govern all creation. The Book of Jubilees states that Adam was created on the 6th day, as described in Genesis, but adds new details to his story. According to Jubilees, after Adam's creation, God immediately gave him specific commandments, including the observance of the Sabbath, laws of purity, and rules concerning marriage and worship. These laws, transmitted through angels, were to be observed by Adam and his descendants as part of the covenant God made with humanity. While Genesis mentions God's direct interaction with Adam, the Book of Jubilees presents angelic beings as intermediaries who teach Adam to observe God's commandments. These angels, particularly known as the angels of the presence, ensure that Adam and Eve understand the laws of holiness, sacrifices, and moral conduct. In the Book of Jubilees, chapter 3, verses 1 to 2, it states, "And on the 6th day of the 2nd week, we brought, according to the word of God, to Adam all the beasts and all the cattle, and all the birds, and everything that moves on the earth, and everything that moves in the water, according to their kinds, and according to their kinds, the beasts on the 1st day, and the cattle on the 2nd day, and the birds on the 3rd day, and everything that moves on the earth on the 4th day, and everything that moves in the water on the 5th day." This angelic interaction was meant to reinforce the idea that God's law is not merely a human invention, but a part of the celestial order. The angels taught Adam that he must observe God's laws as an eternal covenant, just as they observe the same laws in the heavenly realm. Is it possible that God's laws, transmitted through angels, were given to humans long before Moses received the 10 Commandments? And what could we learn from these ancient laws? After the fall of Adam and Eve, the Book of Jubilees adds new insights to the story of their children, Cain and Abel. While Genesis records that Cain killed Abel, Jubilees provides additional details about the subsequent events. Cain's murder of Abel is seen as the first serious transgression of God's law, a sin that carries spiritual consequences for all humanity. But despite Cain's banishment, the Book of Jubilees emphasizes that the righteous lineage of humanity continues through Seth, Adam's third son. In Jubilees, Seth is presented as a paragon of righteousness, taught to observe the laws transmitted by the angels. This sets the stage for later descendants, including Noah, to continue the covenant with God. The story of Noah and the Great Flood, familiar from the book of Genesis, is expanded in the Book of Jubilees with new details about the events preceding and following the catastrophe. In Jubilees, the emphasis is not just on Noah's salvation, but also on the covenant the Almighty later makes with him, a covenant stressing the importance of purity, righteousness, and adherence to God's laws. Before the flood, Jubilees details the corruption of the earth, focusing particularly on the Nephilim, the offspring of fallen angels and earthly women. While Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, only briefly mentions the Nephilim, Jubilees reveals more, showing how these giants contributed to the spread of lawlessness that led the Lord to cleanse the earth with the flood. And lawlessness multiplied on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way, both men and cattle, and beasts and birds, and everything that walks on the earth. All of them corrupted their ways and their orders, and they began to devour one another. Jubilees chapter 5, verse 2. This moral decay was caused not only by human sinfulness, but also by the influence of fallen angels, who introduced forbidden knowledge and distorted the natural order. God's response was immediate. He unleashed the flood to destroy this corruption, but preserved Noah and his family due to their righteousness. After the flood, Jubilees reports that the Lord not only promised never again to send a flood upon the earth, but also established a new covenant with Noah, which included specific laws concerning purity and sacrifices. These laws, which were later transmitted to the Israelites, were intended to help humanity maintain holiness and avoid the corruption that led to the flood. An important detail in Jubilees is that Noah was instructed to observe the Sabbath and adhere to the same laws as Adam regarding sacrifices and purity. This covenant marked a new beginning for humanity, but it also emphasized the importance of maintaining obedience to God's laws to prevent further judgment. The laws concerning sacrifices, which would later be formalized in the law of Moses, were already observed by Noah as part of this covenant. These laws included instructions on how to offer burnt offerings to the Lord and how to remain clean, both in body and spirit. In Genesis chapter 12, we encounter Abraham when God calls him to leave his homeland and go to Canaan. However, Jubilees takes us into Abraham's youth, adding a completely new dimension to his story. According to Jubilees, Abraham grew up in a family steeped in idolatry. His father, Terah, worshipped false gods. This is not mentioned in Genesis, but Jubilees vividly describes young Abraham rejecting pagan customs, choosing instead to follow the one true God. And he said, "My father, tell me, what is this idol that you worship?" And Abraham saw that it was an image of stone. And Abraham burned them before the eyes of all and fled into the wilderness. Jubilees chapter 11, verses 16-17. While Genesis focuses on Abraham's obedience to the divine call to leave his home, the Book of Jubilees presents Abraham as a revolutionary, destroying idols in his father's house and fearlessly opposing idolatry. This act of spiritual rebellion sets the stage for Abraham's later role as the progenitor of the chosen people, rejecting pagan customs and following God's laws. One of the most striking differences between Genesis and the Book of Jubilees is the assertion that Abraham followed divine laws long before Moses was born. Genesis lacks any mention of Abraham being given laws, apart from the covenant of circumcision described in chapter 17. However, in the Book of Jubilees, Abraham appears as a figure who already observed the Sabbath, offered sacrifices, and followed other laws typically associated with Moses. According to Jubilees, these laws were not invented in the era of Moses. They were transmitted from angels to the patriarchs, starting with Adam. Abraham received these commandments from angels, and he was expected to follow them as part of his covenant relationship with God. In Jubilees chapter 12, verse 25, it states, "And he was taught by the angels concerning that which was written on the heavenly tablets." Unlike Genesis, where Abraham's actions are viewed as part of his personal spiritual journey, the Book of Jubilees presents him as an element of a cosmic plan. He is guided by angels, and the laws he follows are part of a divine order that governs both heaven and earth. These laws include the observance of the Sabbath and various purity regulations that Moses would later formalize. The covenant of circumcision is one of the key moments in Abraham's story. In Genesis chapter 17, God commands Abraham to circumcise himself and all the males in his household as a sign of the covenant. However, the Book of Jubilees goes further, revealing that this was not merely a symbolic act. It was part of a cosmic law inscribed on the heavenly tablets. According to Jubilees, circumcision was not just a sign for Abraham's descendants, it was a divine law that had existed since the time of creation. This covenant was inscribed on the heavenly tablets, which are seen as God's blueprint for creation, containing all the laws governing both angels and humans. In Jubilees chapter 15, verse 25, it states, "And this law is for all generations forever, and there is no circumcision of days, and there is no omission of one day from the 8 days, for it is an eternal ordinance, prescribed and written on the heavenly tablets." In Genesis, the emphasis is on Abraham's obedience to God's command, but the Book of Jubilees portrays this act as part of a much larger divine order. Circumcision is not merely a physical sign, it is a way to align oneself with the cosmic laws that govern the universe. The story of the sacrifice of Isaac, also known as the Akedah, is one of the most significant episodes in Genesis, specifically in chapter 22, verses 1 to 19, where the Almighty tests Abraham's faith by commanding him to sacrifice his son Isaac. The Book of Jubilees retells this story, enriching it with additional details. In Jubilees, this trial unfolds not only between Abraham and God, but also becomes part of a larger spiritual battle. According to the Book of Jubilees, the angel Mastema, often associated with the figure of Satan, proposes this test to God, hoping for Abraham's failure. Mastema embodies the forces of evil, relentlessly seeking to overthrow the righteous. The Book of Jubilees adds that angels intervene at the moment of sacrifice, and the Lord allows the trial to reveal that Abraham's faith surpasses the temptations of evil. In Jubilees chapter 18, verse 10, it states, "And I stood before him, and before the prince Mastema, and the Lord said, Do not command him to lay his hand upon the lad, neither do anything unto him, for I have shown that he fears the Lord." This version of the story in the Book of Jubilees introduces a whole new level of spiritual significance. It is no longer merely a test of Abraham's obedience, but part of a cosmic struggle between good and evil. Mastema attempts to cause Abraham to fall, but God's intervention demonstrates that faithfulness always triumphs over evil. In Genesis, the emphasis is on Abraham's personal trial, whereas in Jubilees this event is woven into a broader spiritual narrative involving angelic forces and the confrontation between good and evil. In Genesis chapter 25, verse 23, it is reported that even before Jacob and Esau were born, the Lord revealed to their mother Rebekah that the two brothers would become the progenitors of two nations, and that the elder, Esau, would serve the younger, Jacob. The Book of Jubilees expands on this prophecy, emphasizing that this was not merely a family conflict, but part of a universal design in which Jacob was destined to inherit the blessing and continue the line of righteousness originating from Abraham. Jubilees introduces an element of predestination, revealing that Jacob was chosen from birth to carry the covenant, while Esau was destined to deviate from God's plan. The book even mentions that Isaac and Rebekah received divine revelation about Esau's rebellious nature and the future opposition of his descendants to Israel. In Jubilees chapter 19, verse 13, it states, "And the Lord said to her, 2 nations shall be divided from your womb, and 1 nation shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger." These words correlate with Genesis chapter 25, verse 23. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. In Genesis, we observe this struggle manifesting through Jacob's cunning and Esau's impulsiveness. However, the Book of Jubilees clarifies that Jacob was inherently meant to inherit the birthright, and that his actions, though seemingly deceptive, were part of the fulfillment of the divine plan. In the narrative of the Book of Jubilees, one of the fundamental divergences from the biblical account becomes apparent. In Jubilees, Esau is presented not merely as a brother who lost his birthright. The emphasis is on Esau embodying a line of resistance against the chosen people, guided by God. His descendants, known as the Edomites, appear as a people prepared to oppose Israel, fulfilling the prophecy that the elder would serve the younger. While Genesis mentions the enmity between Esau and Jacob that arose after the events related to the birthright and blessing, specifically in chapter 27, verse 41, in Jubilees this theme receives a broader development. Here it is shown how Esau's descendants transform into a people openly opposing the line of Jacob, that is, the future Israelites. This becomes part of a large-scale cosmic confrontation, often emphasized in Jubilees, namely the struggle between righteousness, represented by Jacob and Israel, and rebellion, personified by Esau and Edom. In Jubilees chapter 37 it states, "And Esau took his wives and his sons and all that he had, and he went to Mount Seir and dwelt there. And Esau became a people, and they oppressed the descendants of Jacob." For comparison, Genesis chapter 36, verse 8 states, "So Esau, that is Edom, settled in Mount Seir." In Jubilees, it is unequivocally stated that Esau's rebellion was not only personal, but also national in scope. His descendants became the Edomites, who throughout history engaged in numerous conflicts with the Israelites, reflecting a spiritual confrontation that began with their progenitors. One of the key moments in Jacob's life is receiving the blessing from his father Isaac. In Genesis, this blessing ensures that Jacob will become the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, as stated in chapter 27. However, Jubilees goes further, emphasizing that Jacob not only received a blessing, but became the perpetuator of divine laws transmitted from Abraham himself. According to Jubilees, after receiving the blessing, God and angels reveal to Jacob a body of laws that he and his descendants must follow. These laws include the observance of the Sabbath, rules of purity, and the sacred calendar, establishments that were later formalized in the law of Moses. Jacob appears as the guardian of these laws, entrusted with ensuring that his descendants, the future Israelites, observe them as part of their covenant union with God. In Jubilees chapter 27, verse 23, it states, "And the Lord appeared to him by night, and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your seed, and your seed shall be as the stars of heaven." For comparison, Genesis chapter 28, verses 12 to 15, describes Jacob's vision of a ladder and God's promise to him. In Jubilees, the laws received by Jacob are viewed as part of a cosmic order that governs both heaven and earth. This emphasis on Jacob as the heir of divine law elevates his role, making him not just a recipient of the birthright, but a guardian of God's eternal commandments, linking him to the heavenly tablets mentioned earlier in Jubilees. The Book of Jubilees recounts that the rivalry between Jacob and Esau represents something more than a mere personal feud. It expands into a prophetic foresight of an unending struggle between their descendants. The text suggests that the nations descended from Esau will perpetually oppose the Israelites, Jacob's descendants, throughout human history. This transcends the personal animosity between the two brothers, connecting to the concept of a spiritual battle between good, personified by Jacob and Israel, and evil, represented by Esau and Edom. In Jubilees, this prophetic struggle extends beyond territorial disputes, forming part of a grand cosmic war between the forces of light and darkness. Esau's lineage symbolizes nations that will become adversaries of God's chosen people. The tension between them runs throughout biblical history. This spiritual confrontation plays a key role in Jubilees' apocalyptic vision, linking the conflict to eschatology. In Jubilees chapter 45, verse 3, it states, "And Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt to Joseph, and the sons of Esau remained in the land of Edom. And from that day the enmity between the nations remained." For comparison, Genesis chapter 33, verse 16 states, "So Esau went on his way that day to Seir." This portrayal of an unending spiritual struggle reflects the broader themes of the Book of Jubilees, where the history of the patriarchs is part of an overarching cosmic design that encompasses not only Abraham's family, but also the destinies of entire nations, as well as the final battle between good and evil. In Genesis, we see Jacob having 12 sons from his wives Leah and Rachel, as well as their maidservants. These 12 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin, become the progenitors of the tribes of Israel. However, the Book of Jubilees adds a dimension of divine order to the birth of these sons, presenting their arrival not merely as a result of human relationships, but as part of a preordained plan by God. According to Jubilees, the timing and sequence of the births were predetermined by God in accordance with the sacred calendar. In Jubilees, chapter 28, verse 12, it is emphasized that each son was born according to a divine schedule, making their birth part of a larger cosmic design. The text states, "And Jacob's wives and maidservants bore him 12 sons, each according to the time appointed by the Lord, and their destinies were written on the heavenly tablets." For comparison, Genesis chapter 29, verse 31, and chapter 30, verse 24, describe the birth of Jacob's sons. While Genesis focuses on the narrative aspects related to the birth of these sons, the Book of Jubilees emphasizes that their births were recorded on the heavenly tablets, reinforcing the idea that the 12 tribes are an integral part of God's divine plan for the world. In the fabric of creation, a special place is held by the story of Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, whose position was forfeited after committing a grave sin, as described in Genesis chapter 35, verse 22. The Book of Jubilees expands on this narrative, focusing on the spiritual consequences of the transgression and explaining the elevation of Judah and Levi. In Jubilees, Reuben's sin appears as a violation of divine ordinances that existed long before he committed it. His act is viewed not merely as a personal failing, but as a spiritual crime, depriving him of the right to lead the tribes of Israel. This paves the way for Judah, the fourth son, to leadership over the tribe, and for Levi to assume the priestly role, which is part of the divine plan. In Jubilees chapter 33, verse 10, it states, "Because of his sin, Reuben the firstborn was not reckoned in the inheritance, but Judah was chosen as prince over his brothers, and Levi for the priesthood forever." A parallel can be found in Genesis chapter 49, verses 3 and 4, where Reuben is disqualified due to his sin. While Genesis mentions Reuben's forfeiture of his birthright, Jubilees emphasizes with greater force how this event fits into the cosmic plan. Judah's elevation is part of God's eternal law, and Levi is designated for the priesthood, linking their destinies to the spiritual structure governing the future of Israel. In the Bible, the tribe of Levi is set apart for priestly service, and Moses and Aaron descend from this lineage, as indicated in Exodus chapter 28. In Jubilees, Levi's role as the priestly tribe is presented as part of an eternal mandate. The book emphasizes that Levi's priesthood is not merely a matter of tribal affiliation, but an institution recorded on the heavenly tablets long before the Levitical priesthood was formalized under Moses. According to Jubilees, Levi was chosen by God for spiritual leadership over the tribes, responsible for observing divine laws. His priestly role is part of the cosmic order, and he is given special responsibilities that connect heaven and earth. In Jubilees chapter 32, verse 17, it states, "And Levi was set apart for the priesthood forever, to offer sacrifices and to be a mediator between the people and the Lord, for this was prescribed on the heavenly tablets." This can be compared with Exodus chapter 28, where the descendants of Levi are set apart as priests. While Genesis and Exodus focus on the Levitical priesthood in the time of Moses, Jubilees emphasizes that Levi's role was part of God's plan from the very beginning. This makes Levi's priesthood not merely a response to historical circumstances, but an essential part of a cosmic order that predates the events at Mount Sinai. In Genesis, Jacob's 12 sons become the progenitors of the 12 tribes, and their story unfolds as they settle in the Promised Land. In Jubilees, the tribes are not merely inheritors of the land, but guardians of God's law, entrusted with observing the divine commandments passed down from Abraham and Isaac. According to Jubilees, each tribe carries a special spiritual responsibility and must follow the laws written on the heavenly tablets. The book emphasizes that the 12 tribes were chosen not only to inherit the land, but also to serve as guardians of God's commandments, ensuring the observance of God's laws by all generations. In Jubilees chapter 29, verse 6, it states, "And the Lord said to Jacob, These are the laws for your sons and their descendants forever, written on the heavenly tablets, that they may walk in them and live." A parallel can be drawn with Genesis chapter 49, where Jacob's blessings to his sons are presented. While Genesis states that Jacob's sons became the progenitors of the tribes of Israel, the Book of Jubilees supplements this information by indicating that they were also entrusted with ensuring the transmission of the Lord's laws to future generations. Each tribe plays a significant role on a universal scale in maintaining the divine order, linking their actions to the spiritual destiny of the entire Israelite nation. In Genesis, it is recounted how Joseph's brothers, succumbing to jealousy over their father's special favor towards him, sell him into slavery. However, in the Book of Jubilees, this event is viewed in terms of its colossal consequences for creation. According to Jubilees, the brothers' betrayal is not merely an ordinary family quarrel, but a grievous crime directed against the divine order, and their guilt extends far beyond what is described in Genesis. In the Book of Jubilees, the selling of Joseph is presented as a terrible sin against heavenly law, and the brothers receive a warning that God's punishment for their deed will befall them if they do not repent. This is a key difference from Genesis, where more emphasis is placed on the brothers' personal jealousy and guilt. In the Book of Jubilees, the brothers' actions have cosmic consequences. Their betrayal disrupts the divine plan and subjects them to God's judgment. In Jubilees chapter 34, verse 9, it states, "And his brothers sold Joseph into slavery, and their sin was written on the heavenly tablets, for they transgressed the eternal laws, and it was decreed that their descendants would suffer until they repented of their great sin." This emphasis on the heavenly tablets transforms their sin into part of a larger universal order, linking the brothers' actions to the future suffering of the Israelite people under Egyptian bondage. Their betrayal sets the stage for God's plan of redemption for the people of Israel through the Exodus, which was predetermined in the heavenly realm. In Genesis, Joseph's ascent to a high position in Egypt is presented as a result of his wisdom and ability to interpret dreams. However, the Book of Jubilees explains this in more detail, indicating that Joseph's elevation was part of a divine plan recorded on the heavenly tablets. His success in Egypt was due not only to his abilities, but also to God having predestined him to be a savior for the Israelites. The Book of Jubilees emphasizes that Joseph's elevation was part of a heavenly design aimed at creating the circumstances that would lead to the Exodus. Joseph's destiny was to bring his family to Egypt, where they would subsequently be enslaved and then miraculously freed by God. In Jubilees chapter 42, verse 2, it states, "And it was written on the heavenly tablets that Joseph would rule Egypt, and through him the sons of Israel would be saved from famine, but they would also be bound in Egypt for a time." Joseph's life, as presented in the Book of Jubilees, appears before us as an event of cosmic scale, where his ascent to power is seen as part of God's grand design for the salvation of all Israel. In the Book of Jubilees, Joseph's success is directly linked to the heavenly order, emphasizing that it was not merely a fortunate turn of events or a display of human abilities, but a preordained course of events. This can be seen in Jubilees chapter 42, verse 2. One of the most interesting aspects added in the Book of Jubilees is the active participation of angels in Joseph's life. While Genesis portrays Joseph as a man with a close connection to God through his prophetic dreams, the Book of Jubilees goes further, presenting angels as Joseph's guides and protectors throughout his life's journey. The Book of Jubilees states how angels were sent by God to guard Joseph from the moment he was sold into slavery, thereby ensuring the fulfillment of his destiny in Egypt. These angels intervened at key moments in Joseph's life, protecting him from harm and helping him remain faithful to God. In Jubilees chapter 34, verse 21, it states, "And the Lord sent his angels to guard Joseph on his way to Egypt, so that he should not perish, for his life was precious in the sight of the Lord, and his path was written on the heavenly tablets." This detail about angelic involvement introduces an additional layer of spiritual protection to Joseph's story that is absent in Genesis. It demonstrates that Joseph's journey was not merely a series of fortunate coincidences. His path was carefully planned by God, and angels ensured that he would rise to power and ultimately save his family. One of the most significant differences between Genesis and the Book of Jubilees lies in how Joseph's life is connected to the Exodus. In Genesis, Joseph's role concludes with his family settling in Egypt, but in the Book of Jubilees, his life is presented as a prophetic foreshadowing of the Israelites' enslavement and subsequent liberation. According to Jubilees, Joseph's ascent to power in Egypt was not only a salvation for his family from famine, it was also the fulfillment of a prophecy that would lead to the Exodus. The Book of Jubilees explains that Joseph knew about the future bondage of his descendants and that he played a role in preparing for their ultimate liberation. In Jubilees chapter 46, verse 9, it states, "And Joseph said to his brothers, 'I am dying, but God will visit you and bring you out of this land to the land which he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do not fear, for these things were written and sealed on the heavenly tablets.'" This prophetic element is not as clearly expressed in Genesis, where Joseph's death is depicted as the conclusion of his story. However, in the Book of Jubilees, Joseph's death is seen as a transitional moment, the beginning of Israel's enslavement, but also as a prophetic promise that they would ultimately be freed from Egypt. This directly links Joseph's life to the cosmic plan of redemption that would be realized through the Exodus. The book of Exodus narrates the beginning of Israel's enslavement, when a new Pharaoh who did not know Joseph came to power and began to oppress the Israelites, as described in Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 to 14. However, in the Book of Jubilees, This period of slavery is viewed as part of a universal prophecy that had already been recorded on the heavenly tablets. According to Jubilees, God foresaw Israel's enslavement long before it occurred, and it was part of His design to lead them to the Exodus and the giving of the law of Moses. This prophetic plan is closely linked to Joseph's role in bringing Israel to Egypt. Although Joseph saved Israel from famine, their stay in Egypt was predestined to culminate in slavery, which would ultimately demonstrate God's power in liberating His people. In Jubilees chapter 48, verse 1, it states, "And it was written on the heavenly tablets that they would be oppressed in Egypt, and that God would bring them out with great power and wonders, that His name might be glorified." Thus, Israel's time in Egypt appears not merely as a series of historical events, but as part of a larger spiritual narrative where their enslavement and subsequent exodus were predetermined for God's glory. The suffering of the Israelites is seen as a necessary trial that would prepare them to receive the laws given at Mount Sinai. In Exodus, we see God directly intervening to unleash plagues upon Egypt and free Israel from Pharaoh's oppression, as described in Exodus chapters 7 to 12. However, the Book of Jubilees adds a dimension of spiritual struggle to this story, presenting angels as key participants in the conflict between God and Pharaoh. According to Jubilees, the oppression of Israel was part of a spiritual battle between the forces of good and evil. Mastema, a character often associated with Satan, is depicted as actively working to harden Pharaoh's heart and intensify Israel's suffering. It is asserted that Mastema and his evil spirits incited the Egyptians to even crueler oppression of Israel, testing their faithfulness to God. In Jubilees chapter 48, verse 9, it states, "And the prince Mastema stood against them, and he sought to destroy them with grievous bondage, and to make them forsake their faith in the Lord." Thus, the Book of Jubilees introduces a universal scale to the story of Israel's enslavement, showing that it was not merely a matter of political power. Spiritual forces were at work, seeking to undermine God's plan for Israel's liberation. The Egyptian plagues appear not only as acts of divine judgment, but also as part of a larger universal battle in which Mastema attempts to hinder the exodus of Israel. In the Book of Jubilees, the heavenly tablets play a crucial role in explaining how the laws and timing of the exodus were part of God's eternal plan. According to Jubilees, the Exodus was not merely a response to Israel's suffering, it was meticulously calculated and predetermined according to the divine calendar recorded on the heavenly tablets. The book emphasizes that the timing of the Exodus was linked to the observance of sacred laws and that Israel's liberation was meant to bring them into alignment with the divine order. The Book of Jubilees explains that the duration of Israel's stay in Egypt, their suffering, and the moment of their liberation were predetermined, and God's actions were in full harmony with the universal timeline. In Jubilees chapter 49, verse 1, it states, "And it was written on the heavenly tablets that on the 14th day of the first month, at the appointed time, God would bring Israel out of Egypt, for this was a day set apart from the beginning of creation." The Book of Jubilees offers a unique perspective on the events described in the Book of Exodus. While Exodus focuses on the dramatic events that unfolded during the Egyptian plagues, Jubilees presents the idea that the timing of the Exodus was predetermined and inscribed in a cosmic calendar governed by universal laws. This gives the Exodus a significance beyond a mere historical event, presenting it as an integral part of the spiritual structure of creation, as reflected in Jubilees chapter 49, verse 1. The 10 plagues described in Exodus chapters 7 to 12 appear as an impressive manifestation of divine power, intended to compel Pharaoh to release the Israelite people. However, in the Book of Jubilees, these plagues are given a cosmic dimension. They are viewed not only as divine retributions, but also as symbolic acts representing the defeat of the Egyptian gods and the spiritual forces behind them. Jubilees asserts that each plague was designed to strip the false gods of Egypt of their power, thereby demonstrating that only the God of Israel possesses true authority over heaven and earth. Each plague became a blow not only to Pharaoh, but also to the spiritual rulers of Egypt, weakening the forces of darkness that sought to keep Israel in bondage. In Jubilees chapter 48, verse 11, it states, "And the Lord sent plagues upon Egypt, not only to judge Pharaoh, but also to show that the gods of Egypt were nothing before him, for they were false powers, incapable of resisting the Almighty." From this perspective, the plagues appear as part of a large-scale cosmic confrontation between good and evil, where the God of Israel triumphs over the physical and spiritual forces of Egypt. Jubilees also suggests that Mastema and his evil forces secretly tried to prevent Pharaoh from releasing Israel, but God's power surpassed them at every turn. The book of Exodus describes how Moses receives the law directly from God on Mount Sinai. The Book of Jubilees supplements this picture, asserting that these laws were not created at that moment, but were inscribed on the heavenly tablets long before Moses. According to Jubilees, the heavenly tablets represent a kind of cosmic archive containing all of God's laws, established at the very beginning of creation, serving as guidance for both angels and humans. Jubilees emphasizes that Moses was merely a man who received laws that were predetermined for all time. Thus, the Mosaic Law is not merely a set of rules for the Israelites, but part of a divine order governing the entire universe. This means that the laws given to Moses were always meant to be revealed, and their timing aligned with the divine calendar, as reflected in Jubilees chapter 6, verse 17. "And the law and the testimony were prescribed and written on the heavenly tablets, created even before the foundation of the world, that they might guide all generations of the children of Israel." The view of the law of Moses, presented in the Book of Jubilees, offers a unique perspective that complements the traditional biblical narrative, particularly Exodus chapter 6, verse 17. While Exodus focuses on the impressive revelation of the law on Mount Sinai, Jubilees interprets this event as part of a universal design. The laws, according to this text, were pre-recorded in heaven, awaiting the opportune moment to be revealed to Moses and the people of Israel. One of the most captivating features of Jubilees is its persistent assertion that the law of Moses was observed long before Moses himself. The traditional Bible portrays Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as righteous men, yet it does not specify that they were given a complete body of laws. Jubilees, in contrast, claims that the patriarchs already observed the Sabbath, offered sacrifices, and followed a multitude of laws that were later transmitted to Moses. Thus, the law of Moses appears not as a novelty, but as a restoration of laws that had existed since the beginning of time. The patriarchs received these commandments through divine revelation and through the angels who guided them. For example, Abraham is said to have observed the Sabbath and dietary laws long before they were formally given to Israel. In Jubilees chapter 16, verse 28, it states, "For Abraham observed the Sabbath, circumcised his sons, and followed the commandments of the Lord which were written on the heavenly tablets, and the law was revealed to him through the angels of God." Consequently, Jubilees presents the law as an eternal code intended for all righteous people, starting with Adam. Moses, then, was chosen to transmit this code in its entirety to the people of Israel. A unique contribution of Jubilees to the history of the law of Moses is its emphasis on the cosmic calendar. In Jubilees, the observance of time, especially the Sabbath, festivals, and Jubilee years, occupies a central place in the divine order. These laws concerning time are presented as part of the heavenly tablets, and their observance is seen as a way to align with the divine rhythm of creation. In Jubilees, preference is given to the solar calendar over the lunar calendar, with the year consisting of 364 days. This system is considered the correct way to observe God's commandments, ensuring that all festivals and Sabbaths fall on their appointed days. Jubilees warns that deviation from this divine calendar can lead to spiritual disorder, which is why the laws regulating time are of such critical importance in the law of Moses. In Jubilees chapter 50 verse 2 it states, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Write for Israel the law of the Sabbath and the feasts, for these times are prescribed on the heavenly tablets, and you must observe them accurately, so that you do not fall into error." This emphasis on the cosmic calendar is not as pronounced in the traditional Bible, where the Sabbath and festivals are mentioned, but without such an emphasis on their cosmic origin. Jubilees emphasizes that adherence to this calendar is key to preserving God's favor, as it brings human life into alignment with the divine plan. While the Mosaic Law, as presented in the Bible, is addressed specifically to the Israelite people, the Book of Jubilees portrays these laws as eternal and binding not only for Israel, but for all generations, and even for angelic beings. The Book of Jubilees emphasizes that the laws inscribed on the heavenly tablets are not temporary precepts for a single nation. They are enduring commandments that govern both the heavenly and earthly realms. Jubilees asserts that the laws transmitted to Moses are to be observed by all of the Almighty's creation, including angels, who are depicted as observing the Sabbath and celebrating the Lord's festivals in heaven. This transforms the Mosaic Law into part of a universal order that transcends humanity and connects the spiritual realm with the physical world. For example, in Jubilees chapter 50 verse 13, it states, "And the law that was given to Moses on Mount Sinai is eternal and will be observed in heaven and on earth. Angels observe the Sabbath, and the righteous will observe the commandments forever." This idea of an eternal law is not as explicitly stated in the traditional Bible, where the primary focus is on the covenant between the Almighty and Israel. However, in Jubilees, the law is presented as an integral part of creation, connecting angels and humans to God's cosmic order. In the Book of Jubilees, the future of Israel is not a matter of chance. It is part of a divinely prescribed timeline that was recorded on the heavenly tablets from the beginning of time. This timeline dictates the rise and fall of nations, the exile and return of Israel, and the final judgment that will befall the world. All events of human history, from creation to final judgment, are subject to a cosmic schedule recorded in the heavens. A unique feature of the Book of Jubilees is its persistent assertion that these events are predetermined and that nothing happens outside of the divine plan. The book offers a prophetic view of Israel's journey, explaining that their exile, suffering, and restoration were recorded in the heavenly records and are destined to occur according to the divine calendar. For example, in Jubilees chapter 23 verse 32, it states, "And all that would come upon Israel was written on the heavenly tablets, from their rebellion to their redemption, and the times appointed for their liberation were established long ago." While Genesis and Exodus focus on specific events in Israel's history, the Book of Jubilees offers a broader perspective, showing that Israel's destiny is part of a larger cosmic plan that has already been determined. The Book of Jubilees places great emphasis on the role of angels throughout Israel's history, but their involvement becomes even more significant in the last days. In Jubilees, the angels of the Lord are responsible for executing God's judgment upon the nations, ensuring the fulfillment of His divine will both in heaven and on earth. As the end of times approaches, the Book of Jubilees describes how angels will descend to separate the righteous from the wicked, gathering those who have remained faithful to the Lord's commandments. The Book of Jubilees also presents the idea that Mastema, the leader of evil spirits, will be bound and cast into the abyss, symbolizing the ultimate defeat of the forces of darkness. For example, in Jubilees chapter 23, verse 29, it states, "And the Lord will send His angels to gather His elect, and they will bind the prince of evil spirits, casting him into the abyss until the time of judgment, when he will be destroyed forever. In Jubilees chapter 23, verse 29, angels are depicted as executors of divine justice, adding a unique aspect to the prophecies of the last days. While traditional biblical interpretation mentions angels in the context of judgment, Jubilees offers a detailed portrayal of their role in the spiritual war that will unfold in the final days of history. One of the key themes in Jubilees is the prophetic vision of Israel's redemption. The book emphasizes that despite the rebellions and exile of the Israelites, the Lord has already determined a time when they will be returned to their land and renew their covenant with Him. This return represents not merely a political event, but a spiritual renewal, consistent with the cosmic plan recorded on the heavenly tablets. According to Jubilees, Israel's redemption will occur after a period of great tribulation, during which the people will be purified, the law restored, and people will once again live in holiness, preparing themselves for the coming of the Messiah and the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. In Jubilees chapter 23, verse 26, it states, "And the time will come when the children of Israel will turn to the Lord with all their heart, and He will gather them from the nations and establish them in their land, as it was written on the heavenly tablets." While the traditional Bible also speaks of the restoration of Israel, for example, in the books of the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah, Jubilee supplements this notion with the detail that this restoration is part of a predetermined timeline with specific events already recorded in the heavenly records. In its description of the last days, Jubilee speaks of the advent of a messianic kingdom, where a God-chosen ruler, often understood as the Messiah, will establish justice on earth. The Book of Jubilees emphasizes that this kingdom will mark the end of the current age and the beginning of God's eternal reign, where the law will be observed and the righteous will inherit the earth. The final judgment in Jubilees includes the separation of the righteous from the wicked, with the wicked being cast into the lake of fire, where they will be destroyed forever. Mastema and his evil spirits will be defeated, and the Messiah will rule in peace and righteousness. This vision of the last days resonates with the apocalyptic imagery presented in the book of Revelation. However, Jubilees places greater emphasis on the role of law and the restoration of cosmic order. In Jubilees chapter 50, verse 13, it states, "And the Lord will establish His kingdom on earth, and the righteous will rule with Him, for the law will be written on their hearts, and the wicked will be cast into the lake of fire." This messianic kingdom in Jubilees reflects a vision of a restored creation, where the law is fully observed, and the righteous receive their reward for their faithfulness. The final judgment leads to the ultimate defeat of evil, ushering in an era of eternal peace.